Good morning, everyone. Been a good conference so far, yeah? Right, my name is Casey May, and I'm going to be presenting on Bowzer the browser and the AF Guild, both of which you may not have a good idea of what those are, but we'll get into that. So by way of introduction, I'm a co-founder of a company called Zaya Solutions. We're a sponsor of GDevCon NA. We're a company of CLAs, and we have extensive experience with developing large scalable applications to address complex problems. And we pride ourselves on clean, modular, high-quality solutions and we try to adhere to solid principles as much as possible. And together we have over 50 years of combined LabVIEW experience. On a personal note, I've been using LabVIEW since 2006. I've been a CLA since 2007. I'm also a CLED. I'm a founding member of the AF Guild, and also I'm on the GID Exchange Committee. And as of yesterday, the winner of the wiki quiz, which is clearly the most important thing, if you ignore the fact that 2 people gave up their spots in front of me to claim that title. All right. Okay, so first things, I'm going to have you guys open up your phones, computers, whatever, and go to this URL if you wouldn't mind. I have a poll. Bring this up. I was having kind of spotty internet connection earlier, but I think it's okay now. All right, so the first question, oh, sorry. For me too. Mostly good here? A couple more seconds. So while I'm waiting for people to connect, I have 2 questions. This presentation is going to be about Bowzer and the AF Guild, which focuses a lot on Actor Framework, but don't run off scared just yet. I'm not going to go into deep theory or anything like that about how Actor Framework works or anything. Bowzer is a tool and a utility to make development using Actor Framework a little bit easier. It's the hope. And so if there are challenges that you've had developing Actor Framework or we're kind of scared to jump into it, hopefully after seeing this, it's a little less scary. All right, so I think that's enough time. Do that. Okay, so the first question, and I'm focusing on development here, or I would like you guys to focus on development, is just type, and I think it works best if you type it in 1 word. If you type it in 2 words, it takes it as 2 separate entries. But just thoughts, ideas, impressions that come to your mind in a positive light when you think of developing using Actor Framework. Modular, reusable. Encapsulation. All right, so I see extendable too, making use of inheritance, object-oriented. Somebody put confusing. That's for the next one. You're getting ahead here. All right. So let me move on to the next one. All right, so now looking for responses about things that are not so positive. Again, talking about development using Actor Framework. So, project navigation. Glad someone said that. Complex, non-intuitive. Overly complicated. Yeah, a lot of learning curve. All right. Yeah, lots of classes. That's also true. All right, cool. I think that's telling me it's full, but that's kind of what I expected to see. And I'm hoping that after you see Bowzer, and we talk about the AF Guild a little bit, some of these things might be addressed to some degree. And hoping that, yeah, it'll make your lives a little bit easier. So let me switch back here. Okay, so the first question, I keep talking about Bowzer. What is Bowzer? What do you guys think of when you think of Bowzer? That guy? Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm here to tell you that that's wrong. Bowzer is not equal to Bowzer. Our Bowzer clearly has a Z instead of an S. We don't want to be sued by a notoriously litigious company that may own the rights to that first guy there. No, Bowzer is a utility, like I keep saying, to help make development in Actor Framework a little bit easier. And the idea origins for Bowzer, it started at Zaya Solutions. We use Actor Framework a lot for our projects, but we also know that it's not necessarily every developer's preference. Actor Framework has seen in some of those poll responses, and there's a consensus here, it seems like. It's powerful, but it's not always the easiest to use. Compared to other frameworks, for example, DQMH, we recognize there's a lack of tooling that exists around some of the stuff that might make things easier. So, on the other hand, we know there's a strong community of AF users. There's a lot of people, just talking to people at this conference, there are a lot of people that use Actor Framework, but for whatever reason, the tooling doesn't exist. People aren't as vocal about some of the things that they're doing. And we think that there's a lot of people out there that have the motivation and skill to make Actor Framework even better. So that brings me to the Actor Framework Guild. So thanks to Q for the design there. What is the Actor Framework Guild? The Actor Framework Guild is a group of Actor Framework enthusiasts who want to make Actor Framework more useful and approachable by providing helpful tools and utilities to help developers. That's kind of the 30-second elevator pitch. And the idea for Bowzer the browser, it may have started at Zaya Solutions. Originally, it was just an idea to kind of look at Actor Framework payload methods. I'll explain what that means if that wasn't clear from the last, the 7x7, if you saw that. But it's grown into more than that. And it is what it is today. It has a lot more features because of the contributions from the Actor Framework Guild. And so we're grateful for that, and I hope that this will spur other innovations in this area. So, all right, so just a little bit of terminology before I jump into demos. This is going to be pretty demo heavy, but hopefully that's a good thing. So actors as queued message handlers. So I think most people are probably pretty familiar with the queued message handler kind of paradigm here. Well, in Actor Framework, under the hood, it's a queued message handler, right? But it does things just a little bit differently. This cluster here, what would be a request and the data associated with it, are replaced by message classes. And the case structure and where you put the code and where that's executed for those different requests are replaced when the message is received by an actor by what we're calling a payload method, which is invoked by dynamic dispatch. So when I say send an actor message, I'm talking about this process of enqueuing the message class onto an actor's enqueuer. Everybody with me still so far? Good. Okay. All right. So on to the demos. So I changed the resolution of my screen so that I think it should be a little bit easier to see some of this stuff. Still a little bit tough, but might do. All right. Why did that get? 1 second. Okay. So this first demo, I have 2 projects. Let me open them up here. And they do the exact same thing. All right, one is the data display that's written using a traditional queued message handler. One is the same thing written using Actor Framework. I'm going to run these 2 programs. Would it be helpful if I zoomed in, or is everybody okay? 6 of one, half dozen of the other. If there's anything important, I'll try to zoom in and point it out. But basically, again, this is a very simple application. It just does a few things. You can enter a text message here, click the button, it pops up a dialog that has the text there. Similarly, for active framework, they behave exactly the same. Generate a random number. Click on show red here, it changes this indicator to red. If I click on show blue, it changes the indicator to blue. So let's take a little bit of a look under the hood. So in a queued message handler, I wrote this using just the producer consumer template that comes with LabVIEW. I just modified it to do these actions. So you can see here you have the producer loop, which captures the GUI events, right? So the buttons in this case, show message, show random number, show red, show blue. And these in queue the request, and down here in the consumer loop, you have a corresponding case for each of those requests where the code executes. So you can see we have four different frames here of this case structure that correspond to those four different actions here. I assume everybody's seen something similar to this. All right, but let's look at the actor framework implementation. So I have one actor in this project and one module. So this is the override of actor core, and you can see it still has essentially the producer loop. We have four event cases here which capture the button presses, and they are sending the message to the actor to execute. What's missing here, though, off of this block diagram? The consumer loop, right? Or it's in here, where if you wanted to dig for the consumer loop, and I said under the hood it's a queued message handler, where would you find the equivalent of the consumer loop? Into actor core, right? All right, so if I look in actor core, there's a receive message, and way down in here, there's a dynamic dispatch method called do. And do is where you can see is where it executes the code for each of the different messages. Now, there are still a couple of drawbacks here, right? If you're navigating this way. One is that the messages are not grouped by actor. They're just everything that inherits from message class. And so if you have several actors in your system, this list can get very long and very confusing very quickly. The other drawback I'd say is that when you're browsing here in the do, you still don't see exactly what code is executing, right? This is just doing another dispatch or calling the AF payload method for a particular method. So if I wanted to look at the show message implementation, I still have to go into the block diagram and open up the payload method, the AF payload method, and finally here, I get something that's equivalent to what you see in the queued message handler implementation. All right, but people are probably not going to browse the payload methods this way, right? I don't do it this way. I don't think anybody else does it this way. But what you might have to do, well, if you've installed the OpenAF payload method thing, you can use that shortcut like I showed yesterday. But even then, you don't know where that necessarily is in the project, right? So you might do something like go browse to where the send is because you have access to that, assuming you don't have that other package installed. Then look in the actor, browse to the project, say, okay, that was the show message. Here's the payload that has a similar name. Here it is, and at least in this case, I've organized it so that all the actor framework payload messages are in the same virtual folder. But there's no guarantee that that's going to be the case, right? They could be scattered all over, and I'll kind of show an example of that later. So this is where Bowzer comes in. Now, so just before that too, I mean, I think we all agree that, or I've heard a lot that this requires a change in thinking from from development using a queued message handler, anything based on that, to active framework, because you've moved browsing of the code from the block diagram, the case structure, which you can flick through pretty easily. Now you have to browse the project, right? And this is good for reasons of encapsulation and that sort of thing. You can divide up work, and you have different developers working on it, and you're not touching the same VI, so that's great. But it does make navigation a little bit different and maybe more challenging. So let me launch Bowzer here. I'm going to go to Tools, Zaya Solutions, launch Bowzer the browser. Powered by Zaya and the AF Guild. And what do we have here? So this is Bowzer. Let me zoom here. In the upper left, we have a list box which shows all of the actors that are in the project that you launched Bowzer from. And below that, for each actor selected, you have a list of the corresponding AF payload methods that correspond to messages that that actor can act upon. And if I click on these different messages, the payload methods, it shows you the block diagram over here in this content panel. I can click on the different ones here, and it shows me the implementation. So if I compare this now to the queued message handler, it suddenly looks a lot more similar, right? So you can flick through the messages here, or the cases rather, and then in Bowzer you can do the same thing. Click through these. So one nice shortcut that people may be aware of is if you're in a case structure or any sort of structure like this with multiple frames, you can hold down Control and use the mouse wheel, right? You see I'm not actually clicking on the case selection. It'd be nice if Bowzer could do that too, so we did it. You hold down Control, use the mouse wheel, and you can flick through the different payload methods, just like you would on a standard queued message handler. So, and you still get to keep all the niceties of Active Framework and the command pattern. In the show message AF payload method, you get strictly typed inputs, right? Versus having to change a variant, cast it to the proper type. And personally, I really like that about Active Framework, and I'm a big fan of strictly typed inputs and that sort of thing, because anything that can help me find mistakes that I've made earlier in the process rather than waiting for runtime, I enjoy. So, what else here? So another thing is that oftentimes the messages for an actor, forgetting about interfaces for just a second, are often the API, the public API that's exposed to other actors or other modules to talk to that actor, right? But in some cases, you don't want all the messages to be private. They might be internal. They might be community scoped. So let me change this here to community. Let me change this to private. And now, if I run Bowzer, you can see that the access scope of those particular payload methods and the associated messages are reflected in Bowzer as well. Zoom in here too. Right, there's a little blue key for community scoped on the show blue. On the show red, I made that privately scoped, so there's the little red thing there. So that's kind of a quick visual way to know the access scope of these different things. So, I think that does it for that demo. All right. So the second demo I want to show, I believe if we go back, if I think back to that kind of word cloud that people said when we were doing some of the positive aspects of developing with Active Framework, somebody said extensibility or something like that, and I said that's related to inheritance. So yes, let's dive into inheritance and dynamic dispatch. So this project here is a project that you can find on the Active Framework community forums. It was written by Stefan Lemons, who is also a member of the AF Guild. He has a really nice series of example projects written for Active Framework that go from very basic to more complicated. This one is kind of one that's right in the middle. I'll put the URL and a QR code for that later too, so you can get that if you want. So this particular project, it's meant to show plugin architectures using Actor Framework. And there is a plugin parent here, which defines a number of methods. In this case, all these methods correspond to messages in the parent actor. And then there are a couple of plugins which both inherit from this plugin parent. In this case, the methods are, this class is probably a bit overloaded, but it shows it makes the point of how plugins can be used and inherit from a parent. So in this case, there's a counter and there's a timer class, both inherit from parent. And let me just run this really quickly. Parent plugin. So this is also doing something fairly simple. There's a counter. I can increment the count, and if I say to get the count, counter says 3, increment it, decrement it, reset. Also, there's a timer. This shows the elapsed time since the program has been running. If I click on timer, it shows it in live view. Same thing with the counter. Okay. But again, the big deal here is inheritance. So let me show you how that works in Bowzer. So this time I'm going to open Bowzer again. Alternatively to going through the tools menu, it works with quick drop if you don't want to browse through that. So the default is Control-Z, Control-Space, Control-Z, Bowzer launches. Okay, so this project has a few different actors in it, right? Has the main one, which is the root actor, which launches the other actors. And like I said, there's a plugin parent, which defines all these different messages that the actor can accept, and any child as well. And now if we look under counter, we can see that though counter, if you're browsing here, has all these methods which are overrides, but it doesn't have any messages itself, right? But that's okay with Actor Framework, because any child class or any child actor can still accept the same messages that its parent can. And you can see that here. It kind of shows you the inheritance hierarchy. So counter inherits from plugin parent. This is showing you that these AF payload methods and messages originate in the plugin parent, but because they show up here, you know that this particular actor can support those methods. And if we look here, when you, the little star, let's see how visible this is, next to the name of the payload method indicates that it's dynamic dispatch. And when you click on it, right, in addition to showing you the implementation for that particular actor, it defaults to the one that the actor is using. Because if you see in this case, there's also this implementation selection dialog. Because it's using inheritance, its parent also has an implementation of this method. In this case, it does nothing. It's expecting the child to override it. But you can see, if you wanted to, you can flick through this. And anything that has a list box or a tree control like this, you can do the same thing where you hold down Control and use the mouse wheel to scroll through it. When you jump to a different implementation, it highlights over here in the actor list which actor's implementation you're looking at, just to make it a little bit easier to see there. And so if we look through here, we can see that counter overrides several of these methods. You know what I forgot to do is record the screen. So hang on one second. I'm going to. Okay. Perfect. This is not dynamic dispatch, doesn't have the show select implementation dialog. If we go to the timer, we can see that for several of these guys, it does not override several of these methods because they don't make sense in a timer, right? So when you click on these, it shows that it's using the parent implementation by highlighting it here, also highlighting it here, and you can see that it's using the parent implementation. So I think this makes it a lot easier to kind of, if you jump into a project, how would you know that these are methods and messages that can be sent to like the counter and the timer unless you knew the project, you looked at it? You could go in, you could right click, you could say show class hierarchy, but I think it's a much easier and quicker implementation to use Bowzer to kind of see this information. So, I'm gonna do it on time. All right. Any questions so far? If you guys have any questions, feel free to jump in at any time. You don't need to wait till the end. All right, so next example. This is a project, an example actor framework project that ships with LabVIEW. It's actor framework fundamentals. It's the coffee shop actor framework example. How many people are familiar with this or have looked at this? How did you find it? Was it super easy to follow? Personally, I will say that if I were starting with actor framework and this was the first example I got, I would be pretty confused. There's a lot going on here, and this does have a README, which helps most, or maybe other projects don't. I don't know why it always opens up too, but it shows you kind of the actor. This is showing the class inheritance hierarchy. This is showing the actor message tree. And if you scroll all the way down here, it kind of shows you some of the messages that each of the actor can implement. But I don't think this is the easiest to read. And if I run this is also an example of an application where what it's doing, it works, but it's not really how I typically use LabVIEW. Like, I'm not programming coffee shop stuff typically in LabVIEW applications, right? Customers can be added, they can place an order, and it does something, right? So it's already kind of a little bit, I'd say, kind of more advanced than I'd expect from an example application. And if we dive into the actual actors, you can see also that this application has other classes that are not actors, but it's grouped the actors into these things. You have people, under people we have customers, we have workers, we have different type of workers, different types of customers. We have the coffee shop actor and we have the work dispatcher actor. And we dive into here. This is what I was talking about when I was saying, like, some projects, it's nice if people have taken the time to kind of group together the actor framework, the payload methods. This is one that doesn't do that for whatever reason. Let me show you. Let me open up Bowzer again. Whoops. So again, Bowzer is showing you in the list of actors here, all the actors that are in the project. It's not showing you the other classes because it's focused on showing you the actor framework payload methods for the different actors. There's even more actors in this example, this project, right? I want to focus on the customers though. So one thing you can also do here is if you type in to this box here, it'll filter. So if you have an actor framework project that has lots of actors and you're trying to understand it and you know what the name is, you can type into there and browse to that. Make it a lot easier to find the actor that you're interested in. So let's look at customer though. A customer can show or hide its front panel because it inherits from person. This is what this is showing again here. Customer is the child actor and inherits from person. And it has its own two methods, which are pickup item and update order number. So again, maybe it's just me. I don't know. Maybe other people feel the same way. It's a little bit, the way this is laid out is not the way that I would do it, and that's fine. But if I'm picking up this project and inheriting it from another developer, I want to get up and back to development rather quickly, not spend a lot of time trying to figure out how the differences between how the other developer set up their project and everything. So ways that Bowzer can help you with this. This inherits from person. Let me clear this again. We see that it inherits from person. Where is person in the project? If I right click on this and say show actor class and project, Bowzer will highlight the actor class. So now you can get to it pretty quickly. If I go back to the customer, if I right click on one of the AF payload methods, I can show the payload method in the project. So again, it shows me the implementation that's shown. If it's dynamic dispatch, it takes me to that particular implementation in the project. If I right click, I can say show the message class. Sometimes, or for person, let's say show message class. It takes me to the message class in the actor. So if I wanted to, I can get the the send method, or if I wanted to browse to it for any other reason. And then the last thing, menu item that's on here is show messages callers. So if I click on this, it highlights the VIs that called the send of that particular message. And if there are multiple, it'll highlight multiple. One thing I wish that it did, that it doesn't do, is kind of like the find dialog where you can just go directly to where it is. That's not currently implemented. Maybe with the help of the AF Guild in the future, that's something that might be able to be done. I asked Darren if the control F, that find the search results dialog, is exposed to developers. Unfortunately, he said it's not. It's written in C. So it would require kind of recreating that ourselves. But it's an idea for a future enhancement. So I think that does it for this demo. There's one last example I want to show. If it ever is too small, just let me know and I can zoom in, because I'm looking at the screen here and it's easier for me to see. All right, so the last example that I want to show relates to actually, we've shown how it can help in sort of browsing the messages and kind of viewing inheritance and that sort of thing. This last demo I want to show, A, something with interfaces, and then B, that this can actually be used to help a little bit with your development as well. So actually, I'm going to flip back to one of the slides here. All right, so this demo didn't have time to put together quite the extensive documentation that was in the other one, but this consists of a few different actors here. There's a root actor, which launches all the other actors, and there is a waveform generator actor, which actually is a plugin, and it's going to generate waveform data. It's going to send it to the root actor, which is then going to distribute that message to these other views in this data logger. So the waveform data can be shown in a chart. You can maybe show it in a table. You maybe want to log it to disk. This, to me, is more intuitive than the coffee shop example, something that I typically do more often. So let's go back. So with that context, let me run this example. And this is a modified version of the shipping example that ships with Bowzer. It's not quite the same. Oops, I forgot to change something back. 1 second. So I said the waveform generators are a plugin. I want to switch it to one that's automatically generating waveforms. So if I launch this, it's generating a waveform based off of these parameters here. And you can see, indeed, that the graph view of that is being updated and the table view is being updated. If you click on this, you get some information about the waveform. So pretty simple, nothing too fancy here. Let me check one thing. Okay, all right. So now I'm going to go back to the way it was before, which is I'm going to switch the automatic waveform generation to a manual waveform generator. Now if I launch this, waveforms are not being generated automatically. What you need to do is you need to set the parameters here and then click on generate waveform, and ta-da, it's supposed to appear there, but it doesn't, right? So maybe the person who developed this application, they didn't have time to finish that, or they left it for someone else to do, right? Looks like the messages and everything is in place, but the actual data transfer is not. So let's look at Bowzer. How does Bowzer help here? So just quickly, I also wanted to point out that this particular application, just to show that it can be done, uses interfaces. And Yeah. So it's inheriting from both classes and interfaces. They're both shown here in Bowzer. Right, so, and you can see when it's a class because it has the classic class glyph. If it's inheriting from an interface, it shows that, and it has the interface glyph, so you can tell them apart. All right, so I'll open the bookmark manager, and look at that. Our developer has left us some tags here showing that this is where code needs to go, right? The manual waveform generator, when you hit that button, it's firing this event, but the actual waveform data is not being generated, it's not being sent up the message tree, and that's why we don't see it in the other views. So if I look at Bowzer, it says I need to add a message here. So let's look at the manual waveform. Actually, I want to look at, the manual waveform generator. So I can see that this is triggered off of an event. It's called generate waveform. And I happen to have a payload method here that does exactly what I want. And I want to enqueue this message to this actor so that it performs this action, right? So I could do what I showed you. I could browse to the message class. I could go to the send method for this message and drag it in. That's one way to do it. Another way is to use quick drop, right? Send. Another way that Bowzer allows you to do this, though, this was also an idea that came out of the Actor Framework Guild, is if you have this and you're already looking at what messages an actor can implement, you can just drag it over here. So I'll fire that up. I go here, update settings, same thing, update waveform settings, drag it in here. So you can be looking at and seeing, like, I have these messages that I want to do. I need to implement this. Just drag it in from Bowzer. Leave this open while you're developing, and that should help. So let me save this, and now let me run this again, and hopefully it does what we expect it to. So now, when I click this button, generate waveform, ta-da! I put in the messages. It's sending the information appropriately. Hooray, everyone's happy. So that's a way that you can use Bowzer to help you with your development, right? It's easier than browsing the project, finding the messages, trying to remember what the names are of the messages that the actor supports. You see it all right in Bowzer. Just drag it over and start using it. And that does it for the demo portion. Again, if anybody has any questions, feel free to shout them out. So where can we get it? Bowzer's already available on VIPM. If you want to take pictures of this, there's bit.ly links up there too. The second one is a link to a blog post that we have about it on Zaya Solutions. If you just go to zayasolutions.com and you go to the blog, you can find it there pretty easily. And the example that I talked about, the second one that I showed using inheritance, if you go to that URL, that has not only that example project, but all of the ones that I talked about that Stefan put together. It's a really nice example. I think it builds kind of it's a more natural progression than just jumping into something like the coffee shop. So that's where Bowzer is now. Where does it go from here? So just using it a little bit, there's some improvements that I'd like to see. You saw the select implementation window kind of floats along the bottom, and you can resize it and everything. But it'd be nice, I think, if you could dock that into Bowzer. So that's something we're thinking about doing. If you're doing development, maybe you don't care so much about taking up all that screen real estate to see the payload method implementations. Maybe you just care about what actors are available, what messages are available. Maybe you could collapse that and just kind of leave that running off to the side and drag that in to help your development. An idea that came from Alan, again, AF Guild. Browse maybe the essential actor methods, right? So how many are there? 6, 7? 7 dynamic. So actor core, like handle error, pre-launch init, stop core, those ones. If you're familiar with Actor Framework, you know what I'm talking about. But each actor may have a different implementation of those. It's common for that to maybe be the case. So if you could browse those as well as the actor framework payload methods, that might be helpful. And kind of taking that even a step further, it might be cool, like this works for actors, but I can see this being useful for any class, really, right? If you have a class browser, again, another idea that came from Ryan in the AF Guild. What if you could see all your classes? You could filter by actor or non-actor, and you could see what methods are available, which are dynamic dispatch, see the implementation of them. Because that's another thing about object-oriented programming is that, again, it's not always easy to see from the project without taking a bunch of extra steps what the class inheritance is. If you have a tool like Bowzer, you could show all the methods and you could see the dynamic dispatch implementation. You could do something similar where you can then drag it in so you know what classes implement which methods, et cetera. So I'm hoping that that with the help of the AF Guild, some of these are more actor-centric than others, but these are ideas that I'd like to see implemented at some point in the future with the help of the AF Guild and potentially the GIDEA exchange. Also, I wouldn't mind putting some of those up there, and Bill's going to talk about that a little more next. So this is just some of the founding members of the AF Guild. It's not entirely inclusive, or it doesn't have everybody, but a lot of the people on this are here today. And if you want to get involved or there's something that interests you, you have interest, just reach out to one of us. We don't have an official email or anything, but you can email me. You can talk to any of the other people that were on the list. We have a Discord server for the Actor Framework Guild. If you want to just hop on, talk Actor Framework ideas, throw them around. If you're doing development, that's where we can coordinate efforts and that sort of thing. Yeah, grab that. And so, time. Any questions? And if there aren't any questions, I have a question for all of you too.
There we go. I was just wondering, you talked a little bit about a capability of being able to search for the send message. Mm-hmm. But sometimes messages get sent through that time-delayed send message. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if it has any way of being able to track that down, or if that's going to still be a sort of blind spot. Not
currently. So if you're just using the message class directly, like you would in the time-delayed send message where you just feed the message class in, it's specifically searching for the send in this. But again, that's a potential area for improvement.
Does it search through the dependencies, or do all the actors have to be in the main section
where it's used, or just listing the actors?
Yeah, the listing and all the finding and all that kind of stuff.
I switched this at some point, and I don't remember which way I switched it to. I think it does what's in dependencies, but I'm not entirely sure. For finding the actors, I think it searches through the dependencies, but for looking at where it's used in the project, I believe it only searches what's in the project and not in dependencies. Another thing, it does work with PPLs if you're using them. It's available. It is only available for use in LabVIEW 2020 and later, and that's because we wanted to support interfaces. If you're not using them, especially for Actor Framework, you should. And also maps. It makes use of maps and sets, even though I know that's 2019. But yeah, because we wanted to support those things, we didn't want to have to make it backwards compatible with all the previous versions of LabVIEW. So it is 2020 and later.
I have a question, Casey. If I use this in an older project that has abstract messages, does it handle that somehow?
Abstract messages. I don't remember, to be honest.
Okay. Well, I can go try it. So.
Yeah. Right. Oh, it also it works on different targets too. So if you are using CREOs or real-time targets, it should work there as well. I'm not going to say with 100% certainty that that part of it is bug-free, because I have seen some weird behavior, but it should have most of the functionality. Do you have any other questions? All right. How much time do I have left? Okay. So, like I said, I have a question for you guys then. So this is an example. This was kind of the first utility that was put together with the help of the Actor Framework Guild. And I'm excited about what future possibilities there are. I have some ideas that are kind of brewing in the back of my head. Like I said, some of the enhancements. I want to ask you guys, since you're here, what other ideas for utilities and tools that the Active Framework Guild do you think would be useful that the Active Framework Guild could maybe help bring to life? I know that there are other pain points in using Active Framework, and if you've experienced any, let me know. We'll take a note. Join the Active Framework Guild. Join the discussion. But does anybody have anything off the top of their head that they can think of?
I think you might put a plug in for the GIE here. They should submit it through GIE also.
Definitely. Yeah. So Bill will give more details about that later, but it's definitely a way of doing it.
It kind of surprised it didn't occur to me before when we were talking about this earlier, but I realized as you were stepping through this, since you can do the search for where something is sent, we can actually do like an entire chain of messages based on that same search technology. Because if you where is this message sent from? This message, if it triggers another send, is going to, so we could draw that whole chain.
You could do that whole breadcrumb thing, right?
Yeah, and so I'm wondering if I think we could, and we wouldn't get everything because we would drop a few things like time delay messages or actors spontaneously generating their own messages. But we could possibly use this to generate first cut sequence diagrams, which I'm finding are incredibly useful for understanding your actor systems. And the problem with a sequence diagram is it's a static diagram, and that's documentation, and kind of like our code to be self-documenting. So but I've just been finding it incredibly useful for explaining how an actor system works. Here's my actors, here's the messages that flow between them. Sequence diagram is perfect. We had some Python code that would generate a sequence diagram from DTT traces, but if we could do it without, not on a running system, and get those segments of, messages in and messages out of actors, I think that would be incredibly useful. And I don't know why I hadn't thought of it before.
There was a couple over here.
I just second that. I want a static generator that will generate the sequence diagram, not have to do something dynamic if possible.
Okay. I want to just go on record and saying Alan read my mind. But
everybody wants the same thing.
Just as maybe a little bit of a springboard for that, if you look at Antidoc,
right,
that does essentially that for DQMH, it is open source, and you might get a lot of kind of a roadmap from that.
Yeah, Stefan actually was kind of talking about that on the Actor Framework Discord, and he's been in touch with, or we've done not the best job of putting together requirements for like how to maybe integrate that with Antidoc too. But yeah, it's something definitely to look into. That could be a really cool future enhancement. So, all right, thank you.